So far this offseason, we've seen numerous amounts of changes here in Carolina. A pretty much brand new coaching staff, new players through the draft and free agency. And I'm sitting here today on Wednesday after listening to Ben McAdoo talk to the media following OTAs and wonder, might he be the biggest addition for the Carolina Panthers? We'll talk about all that and more right now here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday through Friday, except that is no longer the case. As we have entered into off-season mode, you probably noticed there's only been one episode so far this week. I was going to let you guys know via social media, just never got around to it. Sorry about that. But now we are in off-season mode, which means you're going to have an episode on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Expect the Monday episode to come out Monday afternoon, early evening. Same thing likely for Wednesdays, potentially depending on what I have scheduled in. And Fridays, right there in the morning, you have the weekly Friday mailbag. Again, make sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where you can at me or DM me. No longer doing the mailbag questions on YouTube. Just go ahead, follow me on Twitter and DM me. Whatever your question is, a lot easier for me to find your questions that way instead of trying to parse through the ton of comments that we get on YouTube. A lot of great interaction there. Just a little bit easier to find the Friday mailbag questions if you guys just directly give them to me via DM or at me over on Twitter at Julian Council. But again, make sure to watch the show and watch every single episode here of Locked On Panthers on YouTube. And I ask you to subscribe also to the channel and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And this one, of course, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Odyssey, and all the other podcasting platforms that are out there in the podcasting universe. Okay, so Panthers back out on the field this week for OTAs, the third phase of it. They'll have mandatory minicamp very shortly going on at Bank of America Stadium in, I think, 2 weeks' time. And then they'll wrap up that portion of the offseason, and they'll have their couple weeks off, and then they'll come back. And we'll be down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, on campus of Wofford College for training camp ahead of the 2022 season. So a lot of important things going on here right now for this team. As I mentioned, leading into the show, if you're watching on YouTube, there's been a lot of changes. We've seen the entire coaching staff pretty much be revamped. You bring in Ben McAdoo. We've seen Joe Brady depart towards the end of last season. They brought back Steve Wilkes. They brought in Paul Pasqualoni. They brought in Chris Tabor to be the special teams coordinator. There's been a ton of changes there. Then player-wise, you've seen guys like Hassan Reddick leave. You've seen Stephon Gilmore leave, but you're able to retain guys like DJ Moore, you extended, who was going to be under contract anyway with the fifth-year option, and you bring back Dante Jackson, and you add players like Matt Iannitis, and you bring back Marquise Haynes, and you bring in Xavier Woods, and so there's been a lot of additions, a lot of changes that happen year in, year out here in Carolina. And I was sitting there here on Wednesday and watching Ben McAdoo's press conference, a new offensive coordinator, and let's go back to that time when the Panthers were looking for a new offense coordinator, and more in particular, Matt Rhule, the head coach here in Carolina, who was retained following another 5-win season, going 5-12, losing 7 straight games. And a lot of people here in Carolina and across the world that are Panther fans were mad as hell and ready to move on, ready to bring someone else in. I talked to Roman Harper, former Panther, a couple weeks ago, and he said that he didn't really look at the first 2 years as years that you could grade Matt Rhule on, but now here in year 3, you can. I understand where he's coming from, but still, you want to see some sort of tangible growth and improvement from the team in the win-loss column last season from what you saw in year 1, where they went 5-11, especially when they made the change to go from Teddy Bridgewater to Sam Darnold. And quite honestly, the team at times felt like they were worse, losing the final 7 games of last season, but they did improve. Special teams-wise, as far as the kicking game, when it came to Zane Gonzalez, that was one of the key storylines going into last year. Joey Slye, no competition for him. Then they bring in some kickers, and they finally figure it out as it ended up being Zane Gonzalez. So you have that position that you feel solid about. Defensively, they were phenomenal for the large part of the season. Not great against the run. That's something that needs to obviously change this upcoming year. But overall, offensively, they just were atrocious. And when Matt Rhule was trying to find an offensive coordinator, there was the rumors and reports that came out from Jay Glazer, who does a great job for Fox, but it's hard to really understand what he was reporting and how true it could be when he said that in order for Matt Rhule to retain his job, he needs to find a rock star offensive coordinator. And if that's the case, okay, how is that even going to be possible considering he's on the hot seat? It's like, all right, if you don't hire this guy who comes in and he's a rock star, then you're gone. What top of the line coordinator would want to come to Carolina and risk only being here for one season if Matt Rhule and of course them didn't have success? It didn't really seem like it made a lot of sense to put that kind of caveat into Matt Rhule coming back when, you know, what rock star offensive coordinator was going to be there. And Joe Brady was supposed to be a rock star offensive coordinator. We saw how that worked out. Matt Rhule talked about going outside of his comfort zone. But this time around, he stayed within his comfort zone by getting Ben McAdoo, who had been out on the street, was a consultant with the Dallas Cowboys last year. Had spent time as a quarterback coach down with the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple years ago after being fired in New York when he was the head coach. And he had done a great job as the OC. But for the most part, Ben McAdoo in the NFL and the community has become, the NFL community, so to say, has become sort of a punchline for the way he handled the Eli Manning situation, his appearance, especially his hair. And you don't look at the guy as someone that you think is going to come in and save your team and certainly elevate you. But that was the best case scenario, really, for Matt Rhule. Get a former head coach, and noticeably on his initial staff and even last year's staff, the first 2 years, didn't have a former head coach on this roster. Now he has Steve Wilkes, who comes back, the native son here of Charlotte, who spent time in the Carolinas as the defensive coordinator once upon a time. Now he's back here coaching the secondary. You've had a guy like Paul Pasqualoni, who spent time as now your defensive line coach. He spent time as a college head coach and been in the NFL for years. Chris Tabor was in an interim last year in Chicago. He's already spent time as an interim before. So you have that experience, which you didn't have. Now with Ben McAdoo, he's coming in and he has quite possibly the biggest role to play this season. When you look at the quarterback position that we spent a ton of time talking about here throughout this offseason, we might even continue to, as Panthers are still open to the idea of potentially trading for a guy like Baker Mayfield. McAdoo comes in with a really good resume of working with quarterbacks. Obviously, Eli Manning up in New York, and just his evaluations. We brought up the New York Post article, and as Panther fans have done their research, because at the time you look at it, it's like, okay, Ben McAdoo, like this really feels like a Tom Coughlin kind of decision. Matt Rhule, who is mentored by Tom Coughlin, really looks up to him. It seems like that's kind of where he went down. Like, hey, coach, who do you think would be a great guy? And you got Ben McAdoo, who no one else in the NFL was banging on his door, being like, hey, Ben, come be our OC. And he had applied and interviewed to be the quarterback coach in past years and was passed up. But now he's a OC. And it's weird to think that how Sean Ryan is more equipped to be the quarterback coach of the Carolina Panthers, but then Ben McAdoo wasn't, but now he's equipped to be the OC. And really, a lot of his principles that he's taught as far as footwork and bringing in the jump ropes and the way that they want to teach these quarterbacks, it's more Ben McAdoo than it is Sean Ryan. And yet they didn't want to bring in Ben McAdoo last year. It makes you wonder how things could have been for Sam Darnold last season had he had Ben McAdoo here as a quarterback coach. And we'll never know. But now we might find out as he's here to potentially save Sam Darnold, whatever is left there, confidence-wise. And if he can get his fundamentals right and his footwork right, and maybe he can play like the number 3 overall pick that we hoped he would be. And at least the Panthers traded for him, hope they could get that talent out of him, which we have not seen, maybe in short spurts, but not overall over the course of a 17-game season so far in his career, especially here in Carolina. And then also with Matt Corral, who we talked a lot about and we saw the Panthers Confidential last time I talked to you, and we know that Ben McAdoo was a big part in their evaluation of Matt Corral and why he's here. And you wonder if Matt Corral would be here if Ben McAdoo wasn't. And you also wonder if things don't work out this year, what the next staff might feel about Matt Corral. But still, right now, he looked at Matt Corral as a productive, physical player who willed Ole Miss to wins. He brought up how Eli Manning, he had a higher winning percentage at Ole Miss, but Matt Corral is right behind there, a program until this season had never won 10 games in a regular season until Matt Corral was able to do that there. And he talks about how quickly he gets the ball out of his hands, things that we've talked about. But he also mentioned he has a lot of work to do. He has a good foundation with his footwork and the training he did at Ole Miss, but communication is going to be the biggest thing, as they're going to have to institute both verbal and visual cues. In college, it's more like look at the sidelines, see what the crazy boards that we see of all those logos and memes and all that on there. And that's how you get the play. But in the NFL, you're huddling. It's a lot slower pace. It's not as quick. Now, yes, the college game has come into the NFL, but it's going to be a little bit longer of a learning curve for him than it would back when he was playing college football. And even talk about Sam Darnold, how, he's been putting a lot of time preparation-wise, being asked to do things he hasn't done in the past and bring down the fundamentals. I know somebody where a lot of people look at the quote about how Sam was new to a lot of these things. And he's new to the concepts that he's learning under Ben McAdoo, maybe new to some of the principles that he's trying to show him. And Sam Darnold had talked about it. This is his fourth offense in 5 years and how none of them have really been the same. So that's difficult on him. But Ben McAdoo coming here, trying to not just help the quarterbacks, but an offense that without Christian McCaffrey the last 2 seasons has struggled. Now with Dante Foreman and Chuba Hubbard in second year, if McCaffrey does have injuries, can they still be able to have a strong running game and be able to get something out of the running back pass game? And at wide receiver, we saw a large dip last year in their production across the board. Like DJ was great, still a ton of drops. Robbie Anderson really fell off a cliff last season. Can he come back? Can Terrace Marshall show that promise and be that number 3 wide receiver? Can Shi Smithy comes back over Carolina? What can he add to this team? So it's not just that, it's also the tight end game where we have not seen anyone since Greg Olsen suffered from his foot injuries and then left to go to Seattle and then overall retired. We haven't seen anyone here in Carolina provide that kind of production from that spot. And Ben McAdoo said today on Wednesday that he feels like that's one of the strongest position groups on the team. Okay, let's see it. Let's find out why the Panthers decided to extend Ian Thomas or to re-sign Ian Thomas and give him that money. Is it in large part because of Ben McAdoo? Let's see what he can do with Tommy Trimble. Let's see what he can do with Colin Thompson and with Steven Sullivan and all the other tight ends on his depth chart right now, because that would be something that we'd love to see be a part of the passing game once again here in Carolina. And we've been used to it with Wesley Walls and with Greg Olsen and with guys even with Shockey briefly. We've seen it here in the past, and it just has not been the case here in Carolina the last couple of seasons. Of course, the offensive line also has to be great. So Ben McAdoo, he comes in trying to fix one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And I look at him as quite possibly the biggest addition for the Carolina Panthers here in 2022. And it's weird to say that because I don't think at the time when he was hired, I or really many of you out there would have felt that way. Maybe you still don't. The more you research him, the more you think about what he's done in the past, what he could potentially do here in Carolina, the more appetizing Ben McAdoo does come as the offensive coordinator here in Carolina for this upcoming season in 2022. So maybe he is the biggest addition in the offseason for the Carolina Panthers. But, of course, we'll see once we actually get to the season. And once we get to the season, there's a couple guys that I'm really intrigued by here on this roster. Some guys are going to be asked to step up. Some guys are coming to Carolina for their first year. I'm going to go over some of the most intriguing players to me right now here on June 1st with the Carolina Panthers heading in 2022. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. If you listen to the podcast every day, or at least now Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you should know already that Built Bar is by far the best tasting protein bar. And guys, they have finally delivered something even more incredible. The Built Granola bars are finally here. Built Granola bars come in 3. That's 3 unbelievable flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. Want to try all 3 flavors? Well, you can get a mixed box at built.com right now. These are so different from the bars and the puffs. Built granola bars are loaded with granola. It's the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness, but just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate with 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar. Built granola bars will change your world. Built has cracked the code to better granola. They're the perfect healthy snack to pack in your lunch, take on the road, and eat as a snack. So go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your first order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. So heading into the 2022 season, we still got a ways to go. Got this week of OTAs, next week of OTAs, and then they'll wrap up mandatory minicamp in a couple weeks. And that will be it for a while here in Charlotte, as Panthers will head down to Spartanburg on the campus of Wofford College for training camp. And we spent a lot of time talking about some players that we're interested in seeing this season. And I think it's the easy ones are like, okay, what is Matt Corral going to look like if he gets an opportunity to compete? Ben McAdoo talked about today on Wednesday, June 1st, that he doesn't really see him as someone who's competing right now. Now, once they get to training camp, then they'll try to define roles. And it's not just Matt Corral. He was asked about Terrace Marshall. Like, no, we're trying to learn the offense. Everyone's trying to learn the offense. Like, let's just do that, go through install. We'll do it again once we get down to training camp, but that's when we're going to really be competing. So you're interested in seeing what Matt Corral will do. And I obviously am interested in seeing what Matt Corral can do this season. Sam Darnold, can he be saved? Is it possible? Can Ben McAdoo be someone who can finally get the best out of Sam Darnold? We have yet to see it in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey, if he's healthy, what does he look like? Obviously, you're interested in seeing what Ickey Ekwonu can do this season. I talked about on Monday, which of the rookies, needs to have the biggest impact for the Panthers. And it really feels like it's either Ickey or Matt Corral. Maybe it's somebody else. And Of course, you're going to be interested in DJ Moore, but there's some other players, though. It's not really beneath the surface. Some other guys that I just look at, and I'm just really interested, super intrigued in what they potentially could do here in Carolina in 2022. And just, it's not necessarily like, will they meet that expectation? I wonder just what they're going to do and what kind of role they might have, as they might be vital to the Panthers having success in 2022 and getting back to the playoffs. And the first one is someone I already mentioned. It's Terrace Marshall. He's got an opportunity right now, this week and next, with OTAs going on before Robbie Anderson comes back from Florida and is there for mandatory minicamp, which we expect that he'll be there. And it's not a big deal. He's not here right now because he wasn't last season, but he's got an opportunity. Again, he's not, and as I just mentioned, but Ben McAdoo said, he's not competing for a role, but he is here for install. And I don't know where Robbie Anderson is in terms of his knowledge of the offense, but you would think it'd be beneficial to actually be here opposed to not. But hey, Robbie's doing what Robbie needs to do to prepare for the season, and he'll be here in a couple weeks, and then he'll be at training camp, and hopefully he'll bounce back in 2022. Either way, Terrace Marshall can get ahead of the curve here over Robbie Anderson. He has the great physical size and ability, and he just has not been healthy. And if he's finally healthy, what could he do for this Panthers offense? That was someone that we were so excited to see last year. We had expectations for him. Maybe we shouldn't have, considering his injury health in recent years and even when he was drafted. And at this period of time last year, he was barely participating, if at all, for the Carolina Panthers in OTAs in those workouts. So now this season, if he's healthy, the Panthers desperately need number 3. Could he be that number 2? Because eventually Robbie, probably after the season, won't be here in Carolina, and the Panthers are going to need someone to step up. Because outside of DJ Moore, you don't really know who you're going to be able to rely on past this season here in Carolina at the wide receiver position. And another person who comes from that same draft class and was actually picked around after him is Brady Christensen. We talked a lot last year about, Brady Christensen, can he come in? Can he be that left tackle of the future? Was an All-American at BYU, went up against guys like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who's down in Tampa Bay, who's going to be an adversary for years to come in the division with the Bucs. And could Brady Christensen step in, and could he be that left tackle of the future? He had the 3rd round grade as a tackle, the 2nd round grade as a guard. So that kind of let you know where they thought of him, how they thought of him in those positions, and that they likely saw him more as someone who could be in the interior. And Matt Rhule's even brought up that maybe he could be a center. And we'll see how that plays out, because there's not right now someone who's going to be a long-term center on the roster. Maybe Cade Mays, they're also playing at that position, the 6th round pick out of Tennessee, who they just took here a couple weeks ago. But Pat Elflein, probably done after this year. Bradley Bozeman could be done after this year. Depends on how you can work out his contract, if at all, as far as an extension or getting re-signed here in Carolina at some point later on, especially after he proves it, if he does prove it. So who knows? But Brady Christensen, if he's stepping in, going to play more snaps this year than obviously he played last year, but more than he probably needed to play more snaps. So we put a lot of pressure on him, a lot of expectations on him. He's going to be on the left side. Now the offensive line, likely situated at left guard, playing next to a rookie in Ickey Ekwonu, who I have a ton of expectations for, a ton of hope for, and think that he can be that answer for the next decade at left tackle. But Brady's got to kind of help him along. It's like, hey, he's the rookie. You're a second-year guy. You play that position before. What kind of advice can you offer him? And it also helps to have some sort of veteran presence next to a young player like that. You have it on the right side where you already have, not really a young players there, but you have veterans in Austin Corbett. You're going to have Bozeman. You're going to have center. You're going to have Bozeman, then Corbett, and then Moten. Then on the left side, really green. Why Brady Christensen needs to step up and needs to be ready to go so that he can help out that rookie and bring him along, even though Ickey probably doesn't need anyone to bring him along, but it's also a good thought. Frankie Louvu, too. Hassan Reddick's gone. Matt Rhule talked about, hey, okay, Hassan's gone. He's a great player, but I expect a lot of great things out of Frankie Louvu this year. And Marquise Haynes and Etor Gross-Matos. And Scott Fitter has gone back and said in the past that, yeah, we look at Frankie as a starter. Brought him in to be a special teams guy. He did way more than that last season, and now this is his opportunity. Can he live up to it? I don't expect him to get 11 sacks this season. Can he get 5? Can he get 6? Can he somehow find a way to supplement that production that potentially could be lost, but at least was lost as far as the personnel being in Hassan Reddick heading back home to play the Philadelphia Eagles? I don't know. Matt Iannitis is another one. Spoke to the media today after OTAs, and he's someone who, and there's a lot of weight talk that went on. We'll talk about that here in a couple minutes too, because there is another player that I'm not going to mention right now, but there's another player I really need to see a lot out of in 2022. Matt Iannitis, he's shown in the past that from the interior, he can wreak havoc. 7.5 sacks, 8.5 sacks in back-to-back years back in Washington. last year and the year before. He had dealt with COVID, dealt with some injuries last season, and he actually owned up to it. Said he came into camp too heavy, that he didn't take care of his body, and that he takes full responsibility for the injuries that he suffered last season. And maybe that's part of the Washington Commanders now wanting to move off of him and deciding that, hey, yeah, you're out of here, because he wasn't in the shape that he needed to be, and that hurt him and it hurt the team last season, especially the defensive line that went in with a ton of hype and praise after the year they had the year before, getting into the playoffs and winning the division and taking Tampa Bay, the eventual Super Bowl champions, to the brink there at home in Landover, up in Washington, or in Maryland, technically. So what now can Iannitis do? He talked about how his comfort level coming here with the staff that he knows. Matt Rhule having played for him, and with Phil Snow, of course. And now he's going to be right next to Derek Brown. And can he be back? And he thinks, like he said, he's back in that playing shape. And you got to be comfortable in that playing shape that he feels like this is where I want to be at now. And I think now that he's taking care of his body, maybe he can be that guy that can help out. Haven't seen Xavier Woods yet. He had a child. So that's someone who intrigues me. Not a ton to say about him. Corey Littleton, can he get that form back that he used to have with the Rams, and that led to him getting that starting gig and that money with the Raiders, but didn't really live up to it? Deontay Brown, where does he factor in the offensive line? I love Darren Gant of the Panthers.com, who came out and had a tweet. He took a picture of Cade Mays and of Deontay Brown. It's like, hey, in this picture, you see the Panthers have something resembling offensive line depth. So really, Terrace Marshall, Brady Christensen, Frankie Louv, Matt Iannitis, and even those last three that I mentioned, Xavier Woods, Corey Littleton, Deontay Brown, might not be players that we talk about all the time, but there's certainly players that are very intriguing to me heading into this 2022 season, as they're going to play their part. Because Matt Iannitis talked about doing 1/11 of your due. Like, that's what I'm trying to do is my job. My job is 1/11 of everything out there. Can those guys fill those roles and play their role and be someone who can help elevate this team this upcoming season? We'll see, but I'm intrigued to see what their production could be. And someone whose production that I think the Panthers desperately need here in 2022 is Derek Brown's. No-brainer pick there at number 7 overall a couple seasons ago in 2020. But the first 2 years just have left a lot to be desired. Not saying that he's disappointed, but he has been a tad bit underwhelming. We'll get into Derek Brown in the season that he needs to have here in 2022 in just a moment here on Locked On Panthers. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's NBA Finals, Stanley Cup playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is a continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's go back to draft night a couple years ago, 2020. We're all isolated in our homes, wishing we could go out and live our lives, but COVID was wreaking havoc early on in the world and here in the United States. And we're sitting there trying to find some respite in the NFL draft and our beloved Carolina Panthers, and wondering, what is this new head coach Matt Rhule going to do there with the number 7 pick? And I remember being on a live stream. I think it was NBC Charlotte, WCNC's live stream, talking draft, I think right before it, maybe leading up to the pick, with John Ellis, who does a great job with his podcast, Billy Marshall, The Roar. Go check those guys out. They do a great job over with the Blue Wire Podcast Network. If you're ever looking for some more Carolina Panthers information and other perspective out there, always love what those guys do and working hard. Also, I was talking to Eugene Robinson, who we remember was on the radio broadcast for all those years. And then, of course, Nick Carboni, the sports director over at WCNC. And just, we were going over just what the Panthers could possibly do there at 7. And the key debate that night was Isaiah Simmons from Clemson, a jack of all trades, dude who could be a defensive end, could play linebacker, could play safety, kind of similar to a guy the Panthers later on took there in the second round, that being Jeremy Chinn, who has been, well, a lot better so far in his first 2 years than Isaiah Simmons. So maybe they didn't make the bad decision at all, but it was between Simmons, someone who you got to figure out where you're going to fit him in your defense. And now we've seen how Phil Snow has done it. Yeah, he knows how to use anybody in his defense and get the best out of him. Hassan Reddick was another one of those players where it's like, oh, he's kind of undersized. How do you use him? Phil Snow found out a way to use Hassan Reddick and got him paid up in Philadelphia. But it was between Simmons and Derek Brown, who absolutely wreaked havoc on the SEC for 4 years. And I love that he was a guy who was like, all right, I'm going to go back, get my degree, play one final year, and just absolutely destroy every quarterback. Kyle Trask, even Joe Burrow, the only defense that season that even remotely stopped. And they did. I think they held LSU to like 13 points that day. The only defense that was able to do that was Auburn. Unfortunately, Bo Nix is their quarterback, and they couldn't do anything offensively. But Derek Brown in that defense had a day, had a season. He was incredible. And he was someone where you looked at all, when you looked at all of the mock drafts, that people were saying, yeah, number 7, Panthers need a defensive end. You saw the defensive lineman that just left. Got an older player in Kawan Short, who was out there at OTAs, by the way, today, KK. And Matt Rhule saying one of his favorite players. Dude, you barely coached him because he was injured. But Derek Brown, he seemed like the choice for a lot of people out there who in the media. And he ended up being the choice for the Carolina Panthers as they passed on Isaiah Simmons, which, again, turned out to be the right decision, as Jeremy Chin in the second round has turned out to be a better player than Simmons so far in the National Football League. The only problem with Derek Brown when he was drafted is you knew that, okay, he's a good player, can be a run stuffer. He got to the passer a little bit, but he's not necessarily going to be someone who's going to go out there and get 10-plus sacks. He's not going to do what Matt Iannitis has done in the past. Now, Iannitis, of course, has not gotten double-digit sacks, but if we're going to compare him to the guy, let's compare him to the guy who was there when he first got here, playing next to him briefly, KK Short. Derek Brown was not going to be KK Short. He was not going to be someone who's going to get that many sacks and have that kind of impact at that size. And that's just how special KK was. He was going to be more of like a Star Lotulelei, but you would hope, give you a little bit more pass rushing from the interior and be more of a game record, even though Star has been a really solid player in the National Football League, especially here in Carolina and his time up in Buffalo. That's what you kind of expected at Derek Brown, but I don't really feel like we've gotten that. And maybe some fans wanted more as far as pass rush from Derek Brown. And I think it really hurt him his rookie year to not have KK, who had another shoulder injury and was out for the majority of that season. I think he missed 13 games that year. And to be a rookie, having Zach Carr next to you, who had been a journeyman in the National Football League and trying to find your way. And he had a good night in Green Bay, got better towards the end of that season. But then next year, you come into 2021, you're thinking, okay, hey, rookie year's done. Got more of a normal process training camp leading up to the season. Like, this is going to be it. And still didn't feel like you got what you wanted to see out of him. Daquan Jones came over, had been a good player in Tennessee. Now he's going to Buffalo, got paid. He was a good player here last year. Just Derek Brown got benched later on in the season of the Buffalo game. We just have not seen it. He hasn't been disappointing, but he has been a little underwhelming. And I love the guy. The personality seems great. Love that he was talking about, the barbecue and just his kids always going to Chick-fil-A. And he's like, I got to eat it. Like Monday through Friday, I keep my weight in order. But on the weekends, I'm going to kind of get a little bit loose, which probably not the best idea. As again, weight was a huge topic on Wednesday afternoon as they asked about Matt Iannitis' weight, Brian Burns' weight, of course, and Derek Brown's. And Brown said he played at 325. His rookie year, I think he was at 330 last year. Now he's trying to get down to 320 this season, and he feels like that's where he wants to be moving forward. And that's where he thinks that he is at his best. And Matt Rhule even talked about Derek Brown just needs to be himself. He can't be at this weight trying to be a 3 technique or such and such. That's just not who he is. He's a guy who can be a really good run stuffer and in situationally maybe give you something in the interior to put guys off their platform there in the pocket playing the quarterback position. Maybe he can be that. But he certainly needs to be a leader. And he's not the most vocal guy, as he mentioned to the media on Wednesday, but he's going to be someone who's going to lead by example. Year 3. Let's see that leap from year 2 to year 3. Second time you're right there, having a full normal offseason. Now, this one's far more normal than last year even, and the year before, of course, when COVID was going on. You got an old school guy, as Brian Burns described him, Paul Pasqualoni as your defensive line coach. It's time to see it. Because it's not just on the field, but financially, this is an opportunity. 3rd year, next May, they're going to figure out whether they want to give him the 5th-year option or not. If he does not perform at a high level this year, then I don't think the Carolina Panthers are going to sit there and be like, yeah, Derek Brown, that's someone who we want to be a part of our future. So big season for him and someone that I really want to see make a major impact with this Carolina Panthers team because, Lord, they need it, especially when it comes against the run. One final thing, Matt Corral missed OTAs on Wednesday because of tragedy apparently in his family. Called Matt Rhule early in the morning around 5:30 from what Rhule said, saying that he had tragedy in his family. So my thoughts go out to him. Heart goes out to him. Hopefully everything's going to be all right. Obviously, things seem not to be great, but hopefully he'll be okay and they can move forward. So anyone out there, show your support out there. Matt Corral is someone who we hope will be here a long time as a starting quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. So just want to mention that here on the show. But again, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. We are once again in off-season mode. So Monday evenings, Wednesday evenings probably, and then Friday morning you'll have your podcast. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that will be the schedule until we get down to training camp down in Spartanburg, South Carolina on the campus of Wofford College. Then we'll be right back to 5 episodes a day because that's what we're going to need by then. And even if there's any breaking news that happens, like say the Panthers do trade for Baker Mayfield that week, you'll get 5 episodes because there's going to be plenty to talk about. Right, but right now, as OTAs, we only hear from them one time, and we have mandatory minicamp. Then we have that massive lull. It's time to kind of take a breath, breathe a little bit, and then just only put out 3 episodes right now. So that's what we're going to do here. But if there ever anything happens that needs to be talked about, needs to be discussed, you might get an extra bonus episode or 5 episodes that week. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that is going to be the schedule right now until we get down to training camp here on Locked On Panthers. And to catch every episode, which more important now than ever, make sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, so whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, Stitcher, Spotify. Make sure to go out there and do that. Subscribe to the show, rate, review, subscribe to Locked On Panthers so you don't miss ever a single episode. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, that's what we're doing. And Fridays, of course, going to continue to do the weekly Friday mailbag. Now, though, like we used to do in just the old podcasting days, and still most of our audience is on the podcast platform anyway, but make sure to follow me on Twitter and at me on Twitter or DM me on Twitter to get in your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Don't leave them on YouTube. Comments, way too many comments, but just leave them in my DMs. I'll get to them. Might go through YouTube every once in a while if we might not have a lot because people haven't gotten them, but still, listener here, DM me at Julian Council, whatever questions you have for the weekly Friday mailbag, and I'll answer them continuously every single Friday here on Locked On Panthers. In the meantime, take care, keep pounding, and I will talk to y'all on Friday.